If you guys need to say anything, if you guys need to say anything, I'm just sending it. Rest of it.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. If you can hear me, say hi, drop a comment in the chat box. Good morning. You're welcome to the first in our series of webinar. You're welcome. You're welcome. Please drop in the comment section where you're joining from. Can you all hear me? I hope I'm audible. Good morning, everyone. Let's just give it 1 minute, 2 more minutes for people to join, and then we get right into it. Good morning. Good morning from Lagos. Somebody said she's joining from Lagos. Good morning. Okay. 1 more minute. 1 more minute. Morning. I see Simon Hagi. I can see you joining from Crown Estates. Jokton Daniel from Lagos. Miriam joining from Abuja. You're welcome, Miriam Coker. You're welcome. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining this morning. So interesting, and I'm very fascinated, how our conversation can travel around Lagos, Abuja, and even outside Nigeria. We are super excited. All right, I think 1 minute is 2 minutes is over. Let's get into it. Good morning, everyone. I am your host and facilitator for today. My name is Anudoapo Akiyomi, and today is the very first in the series of this webinar. We all know that focus group, maybe not everyone, let me just say that focus group will return come August 17th, 2026. And we decided in the magnanimity of our CEO, Dr. Oladipo Raji, we decided to give back to businesses, across Nigeria and even Africa. And we decided that, what, let's give a webinar, quality webinar, bring experts who understands the topic, who can help entrepreneurs, employees navigate the landscape of their career, their profession, and even their businesses. And that's why we have this series of webinars. The very first one today is privacy by design, embedding compliance into systems from day one. We're going to take it bit by bit because I really understand that some people might not really understand what it means to, embed compliance into systems, into your operations from day one. And that is why we have an expert here who is going to do justice, to the topic. Now, to start, I would like everyone to sit back and think for a minute. You own a business or you're entrepreneur here, you can drop a comment, you can drop it in the chat box. I own a business, I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm an employee. Now, I want you to think about it. From day one, when you started that business, you started collating data, right? In fact, I'm going to use something very relatable. To join this webinar, we collected data from you. You filled in your name, you filled in your email address. We also collected, the sector where you work, the industry, or, and your current role. That's a form of collecting data, if you'd agree with me, right? So from day one, just imagine what happens to that data that has been collected. How do I ensure, you begin to think like an entrepreneur. What happens to that data? What do I use with that data? Who has access to that data? How do I protect this data, the privacy of people who have trusted me with their details, with their data, their names, their emails, their phone address, their date of birth, things that are quite particular to these people. How do I ensure that this data is actually used for the right thing and not otherwise? So I want you to think about it. And even as an entrepreneur, imagine that you're leaving or exiting a company. Do you go with data of that company? Do you leave with it? Or you don't even have access anymore? So I want you to begin to think about it, because some of you might not even be a business owner right now. You might not be an entrepreneur right now, but someday you're going to be. And I want you to understand, I want you to know that this webinar will be very, very useful. Take notes, keep it somewhere until when you're going to start your business, or better still, start practicing it with the current employer you're with right now. Think about that just for a minute, and then you begin to tell us, you begin to write down the questions that you have. And it's so important that today we have somebody who understands, what data is. She's working in the intersection of business and data privacy. Her name is Miss Deborah Adenikeju. And in just a minute now, we're going to have our introduction by the team. Our introduction will come up now, and we'll get right into it. Can we have our introduction now? Thank you.
Please welcome Ms. Deborah Adenikeju, the Managing Director for Data Protection and Privacy Advocacy at GPN Associates, a leading data protection compliance organization licensed by the Nigeria Data Protection Company, with over a decade of experience working with data across both national and international contexts. She brings a depth of perspective that has been progressively refined through hands-on engagement in complex regulatory and operational environments. In this capacity, she oversees the design and implementation of enterprise-wide data protection framework, supporting organizations across sectors in achieving and sustaining compliance with the Nigeria Data Protection Act. Our bank data protection compliance or privacy governance from other data.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Miss Deborah, can we have you? Can you do a little introduction of yourself again? Is she here? I believe she's here.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, Anu. So I think the video got cut off somewhere in the middle. If you have the bio, maybe are you able to just read that off then? Just so I'm not, is that possible if you have the bio available?
All right. Give me a minute. That's the bio. So, okay. While we're waiting for them, I think I'm going to just go ahead. Let's welcome Dr. Ladipo Raji, the CEO, Focus Group Nigeria. Can we welcome him? He's right here. He's joining from Lagos. Let's welcome him. Let's welcome him. Welcome, sir. Thank you for providing this platform to have this webinar. You're welcome, sir. All right. I think the bio has been dropped on the chat, so everybody can just follow ahead. This way, just read through the bio. I'm going to start from the beginning again. Mr. Baradi Nikije is the Managing Director for Data Protection and Privacy Advisory at GPM Associates, a leading data protection compliance organization licensed by the Nigeria Data Protection Commission. With over a decade of experience working with data across both national and international contexts, she brings a depth of perspective that has been progressively refined through hands-on engagement in complex regulatory and operational environments. This capacity, she oversees the design and implementation of enterprise-wide data protection frameworks, supporting organizations across sectors in achieving and sustaining compliance with the Nigeria Data Protection Act 2023. Our work spans data protection compliance, audits, privacy governance, cross-border data transfer advisory, and the establishment of this defensible data management structures aligned with regulatory expectations. Ms. Adeni Kijo combines regulatory insight with practical implementation exercise, having led multiple NDPA compliance engagements for organizations operating within high volume and sensitive data environments. She's particularly she is particularly focused on translating regulatory requirements into operationally viable frameworks, enabling institutions to move beyond policy-based compliance towards demonstrable, evidence-driven accountability. Beyond advisory, she is actively engaged in advancing data protection awareness and capacity development, supporting organizations in building internal capability through targeted training, governance structuring, and executive level advisory. Our work also reflects a growing emphasis on inclusive and responsible data governance, particularly in contexts involving vulnerable populations and public interest data processing. Through our leadership, GPM Associates continues to support data controllers and processes in strengthening compliance posture, managing data-related risk, and embedding privacy as a core component of organizational governance and strategy. Thank you. You're welcome, Deborah Adenikiju.
Of course. Thank you so much, Anu. And my sincere gratitude to Dr. Raji as well and the entire focus group for the opportunity to be here today to speak with each and every one of everyone on the call today. So I was very excited to be a part of this, and it's been the very first one, no pressure, but really, really glad to be here, Anu. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It's so interesting that at day one of business, I'm going to pick a very simple business now. Somebody who started a food business, right? Day one, a lot of people are more interested with WhatsApp, how to, get do business on WhatsApp. You know, maybe they have a small Excel sheet to track some of the customers, but at that beginning, nobody is thinking about privacy. That's nobody's thinking about privacy. It's none of your business whether or not. In fact, a lot of people would even post the chats, with customers' name. Oh, thank you. The meal was amazing. It was such a delicious meal. We're not thinking about, the sensitivity of the data that they actually have. And they don't really think that it's a big deal, right? And with AI now, and everybody seems to be on the internet, right? It seems like everything is going out of control. How do we help businesses that is already running, to ensure that it begins to then make transition beyond making transition into ensuring that they protect data? How do we even ensure that those who are starting out have a way to protect their data, but to just give it some sort of context and to ensure that we have a good foundation? Could you just run us through what literally the title of our webinar today, Privacy by Design, Embedding Compliance into Systems from Day One? So what's that day one? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anu. And that's a really great question. You bring up a couple of different things, actually a good number of things already that you brought up. So I'm going to try to take things one at a time so we don't get too overwhelmed at the beginning. So let me start with the phrase that you mentioned, privacy by design. Now, this is going to apply to every business, right? Regardless of the size. But there's a key thing, by design. So inherently, by saying privacy by design, we're assuming here that this is for either a business, a product, a service that hasn't started yet. Because in true actuality, to have privacy by design, that means that prior to the launch, at the very point of inception, right, when you have this idea that you want to create this product, this service, this technology, this app, whatever it is, at the point of designing, as you're thinking about, oh, what would the name of my business be? Where are we going to be located? You're already starting to think about the function of your business. And within that same breath, right, in that same level, you're already starting to ask the question of what does data protection or data privacy mean in this space? So for example, I think you gave the example earlier on about someone who is a food vendor, right? So they're asking themselves, okay, I want to have this business. I'm doing great. Maybe I want to have a bakery. I want to be able to sell things. Oh, what is that channel? Right? Am I going to have an Instagram account? Am I going to have people reach out to me on WhatsApp? If they reach out to me on WhatsApp, what kind of information am I gathering? Can I gather this information? Right? Where do I store this info? So the idea here is that by design, before you have whatever it is that's been launched, that you're creating, you're already starting to ask yourself those questions. Again, what kind of data am I collecting? Do I need to collect this data, right? How am I storing this data? Who has access to this data? How am I securing this data? All of these questions need to be asked. And the reason why this is very, very important, this privacy by design, is because when you start to create your structure for yourself as a business, right, you need to start having measures embedded in the creation of that. So you're signing off your business, right? You have to ask yourself, okay, I'm collecting information that's via WhatsApp, via Instagram, whatever that is. You're asking, okay, what kind of data can I collect? If I'm storing this on a spreadsheet, for example, who has access to this spreadsheet? Is this going to be my PA? Can my daughter access it? Can my husband access it? Can my friend I gave my password to 5 years ago have access to my Google Drive? You have to start asking questions like this. Do I have encryption? Right? What kind of security do I have in place? You have a spreadsheet. Oh, I'm a small business. I just have a spreadsheet on my laptop. Do you have a password on that laptop? Who has access to that? And I don't want to get too far ahead, but you also have to start asking yourself, what is the lawful basis behind the data I'm collecting? So we'll talk about this down the line, but there is an act, right? The NDPA, the Nigeria Data Protection Act, that states the different lawful basis that any business must comply with, right, when you're collecting data. So by design just means at the very core of it, the design of your organization, design of your business, you need to have these things in place, no questions asked. Now, the beauty of it is when you've had this data protection or data privacy, not as an afterthought, right? This is not something you're retrofitting. when you have this in the design of it, it's a lot easier to implement, to sustain, and to scale up. Because at the very foundation of your business, there is data protection. In the actual architecture of your business, data protection is key. So businesses always have to think about that. You can't just jump ahead and say, oh, we'll deal with that later. No, a business that is not designed with data protection in mind, in my opinion, is leading into some serious consequences, especially given the change that we're seeing. There's a whole revolution happening right now with technology, with AI, with data. As I'm sure you've heard, this data is the new gold. Right? It doesn't even matter. This goes across different borders, right? This is something that has value wherever you go. If your business is to continue to survive this new era that we're in, you need to be able to utilize data effectively, but also responsibly. So those two things go hand in hand by design, right? The very core of it, your communication, your channels, right? Payments, who your vendors you're using, all of that, you need to start thinking about where does data privacy, where does data protection show up for me as a business owner in Nigeria?
Thank you.
And I think you're muted. Or is it I can't hear you?
Oh yeah. Can you hear me now? All right. When you
I can
start,
hear you
you
now.
mentioned something earlier. You said when you start to create structures, you also want to you want to also think about the structure of your data, right?
Yes.
Who has access to your spreadsheet? Who has
Mhm,
access to your WhatsApp? Who has
mhm.
access to, even as little as your bank details, your email,
Yes.
who has access to those things? And then asking questions. And then you mentioned something about encryptions. It's so interesting
Yes.
that even on WhatsApp, you will see the encryptions on WhatsApp. It meant that the technology companies are also thinking about you, right? They're also thinking about how your data can be protected, so that nobody just has access to it. So
Yes.
we need to also think about how that can trickle down. If the big tech companies are thinking about also, we also need to look out for ourselves. Then you also
Absolutely.
mentioned that in the very key architecture of your business, that data protection is key, which brings me to the very next question. So if I'm starting a business today, right? Because I want to believe that that some people are here who are aspiring entrepreneurs, right? So if I'm starting a business today, what are the first three things that I must do to ensure that my data is protected? And it's not just my data; it's the consumer data, right?
Mhm.
What are the first three things that I need to put in place?
So that's a great question, Anu. And I'm going to go back to what I said earlier on, because I think sometimes we as individuals, we don't understand the gravity, or I would say the power of the data that we have in our control. Um, I can't tell you the number of times I've heard people tell me, oh, I don't collect data. It doesn't matter to me. This is irrelevant. And then I sit them through it and then like, oh. And they're really surprised of actually the mass of data that they do have in their control. Right. So I think it's very important that people are very mindful of that. So before I even talk about sort of the three different things that organizations should think about at the very beginning, I want to maybe clarify certain phrases that I might just throw in here and there as we talk. So the NDPA, remember I talked about the act earlier on, right? It talks about a data controller and a data processor. Now, what we see quite often is like individuals would tell you, oh, I don't process data. Now, the NDPA, which is the guiding law that we have in the country, will talk about you either being a data controller or a data processor or both. What does that mean? A data controller might not necessarily process data, right? But this organization, this entity is responsible for determining the purpose of the data being collected and how it will be processed. So again, you may not be the one processing, but when you engage a processor on behalf of your business, you're giving them access to that data and you're saying, process this for this reason. process their name, their bank account, so that you can actually charge their card so that I can get paid as a business owner. As a controller, you are still held responsible. So I just want to put that out there. So in case anyone is thinking, oh, I don't process data, this doesn't apply to me, it applies. If you're controlling or you're processing or both, it applies to you. Now, back to the question of like, how can a business get started? The first three things, I will always say you need to do a proper mapping. Whether you're yet to start your business or your business is currently ongoing, right? You've been in the business for like 10 years, 20 years, that's okay. Sit down and start with mapping out your data. What you don't know, what you don't understand, right? It's going to be a sort of a restriction for you in understanding what you have to do. If you don't know the kind of data that you collect, where the data is coming from, right? What lawful basis might be attached to it, what is the purpose of that data, then it's really hard for you to understand what to do about that data. So I always tell my clients an exercise that we have for our clients at GPM Associates is we map out, we call it the scope of data processing, right? We map it out. What kind of data do you collect? Break it down, internal and external, right? Internally, what kind of data do you collect? So for example, many individuals, many organizations have employees, right? Obviously you have the one-man run businesses, but many businesses do have employees. So I would say start internally. What kind of data do you collect about your employees? Because again, these are still data subjects. They're your employees, yes, but you still have an obligation to them as the data controller, right? From HR information that you've collected, right? Where is that even coming from? Did they give this data to you sort of directly? So is this coming that direct collection? Is this coming from the employees? Or maybe say during the process of recruitment, you engage a third-party HR firm, right, to do a background check. So you need to understand what data have you collected from about your employees, right? Where is it coming from? Whether that's HR, that is financial data to be able to process their payments, things around pension, all of that, collect that data. Then move from internal to external. Your clients, what kind of data do you collect about these individuals? What kind of services are you providing and how do you collect this data? Then you can think about your vendors as well. What kind of data do you collect? So you need to have a proper mapping of the data that's been collected within your organization. Once that exercise is done, then you can start to see some major gaps, right? Once you've matched this out, what are we collecting? Who is it coming from? What is the purpose? What is a lawful basis? You can start to ask questions like, okay, we're collecting sensitive data here. Do we have consent for that? I'll give you an example of some things that people don't even think about. For many organizations that have websites, for even those that will say, oh, I don't collect data, by simply having a website, right, we're talking about different locational data, IP addresses, right? Even by having a website with cookies, that is data that is being collected. And you have to understand what is the lawful basis behind this, right? So having to map that out is a very critical first step. When that has then happened, so you've defined that, right? You've collected your data, you've defined what is the purpose of this data. Then you can start to go into certain principles of data protection, right? So again, you have your data, you've mapped it out, then you start to apply the principles of data protection. Now, these principles are actually outlined in the NDPA, which I mentioned earlier on. So I'm actually going to ask one of our GPM staff members to please put in the NDPA in the link, in the chat, sorry, for people to have access to that. There are different principles of data protection. Then go through that data and start to think about that. So for example, there's a very key concept called data minimization. So that means you should only collect the data for the exact purpose, right, that it's for, and nothing more. If you are processing someone's order for their food, do you need to know, I don't know, let's say their racial identity? I'm just giving a ridiculous example right now, right? Is that necessary? Is that necessary for you to collect? Because there are individuals that say, oh, you don't know, maybe next time down the line. That is not permissible by law. The idea is that you take as little as possible as is necessary, right, for you to be able to complete the purpose of whatever it is you're collecting the data for. So data minimization, there's this idea called purpose limitation, right? You don't process the data beyond the use. So for example, people will collect a client's name, email, phone number. Before you know, 2 months down the line, they're sending you an email about something completely unrelated, simply because they now have your email and your phone number. That is a violation of data subject right. Right. So from things like data minimization, purpose limitation, data retention, you are not allowed to have a data subject's data indefinitely. They've given you their data for a very specific purpose. When you are done with that purpose, right, there's certain things you need to put in place to then either delete the data, for example, make sure it's secured, right? For example, having to encrypt it or make sure it's anonymized. Things like this have to go in place, but that comes with the application of data protection principles. When you have that, then you can start looking at specific things to then implement. So you've mapped your data, you've applied data protection principles to it, right? Then you can start to think about other things outside of that. Technical measures, organizational measures. Okay, are my staff trained? Is there awareness on proper data protection practices, right? Responsible data handling. How often are they changing their passwords? Do they understand that they cannot leave with company right, or use it on personal devices? You then have to start asking yourself technical measures, organizational measures. You need to make sure that all of these things are then in place. Then the technical could be, okay, what does storage look like for us? What does security look like for us, right? Do we have a server? Is this a cloud-based option? What are then the different vendors that we could probably use, cybersecurity firms we could use in protecting our data? But I will always say start with mapping, apply the data protection principles, right? And with that comes with understanding data subject rights. Then you can move on to actual practical measures and ways in which you can start to protect, minimize data, delete the data that you don't have, but should not have access to anymore after the purpose at that point. So all these things come to place, right? But I will always say start with mapping it. Map it to understand where you're at.
Awesome, awesome. That was great. I think people should sign up for your masterclass on data privacy and protection. Yes, there should be a masterclass on this. Thank you so much, Deborah. Okay, it's so interesting how she did the breakdown. And I want to see people asking questions on the chat to write it by now. This should pique your interest because this is quite interesting. She did a proper breakdown, from the internal measures to the external measures. And the internal measures, HR, employees, how did did the HR get the data for the employees? And even the employees, how do we even know that they're giving us the right data, right? The external, the clients, right? The consumers. And then she went on to talk about your IP address, the cookie. So your website itself is collecting data. It's so interesting when I want to visit a website and it's saying accept cookies. I'm like, I don't want to accept it. I don't want to accept cookies because I know you want to take something from me. You want to understand my preferences. Now, again, I want everybody to think about this. When you think about something, or you say something, let's say, for example, you say, oh, I need a white shoe. And then all of a sudden, you start seeing shoes on either your Instagram or your YouTube, right? Trust me, your data is being used. You've said something, the cookie that you've accepted, maybe while you were browsing on your phone, your laptop has collected something, and then they are then processing your voice, the things that you're saying, they're processing it. And then you're watching, I said this thing, and all of a sudden I'm seeing all of these things on YouTube. Oh, trust me, they're using your data. It has been used, been processed, right? So we want to also understand, the lawful basis for collecting this data, right? Very important, very key. She also mentioned something about proper mapping. And we're going to come back to the NDPA because while she was mentioning she was talking about the principles, she mentioned the principles of the Nigerian Data Protection, Commission, right? So we're going to still come back, to the principles. But I love the part where you mentioned the measures, the technical measures, the organization measures. This is actually should be something embedded under a department on its own. However, we're going to go to the next question on this basis. Now, I want you to have this in mind, and then this brings us to the next question. which is the startups, right? We have a lot of startups now. Everybody's, in fact, even a 16-year-old girl is starting a business on TikTok or on Instagram or something, and what have you. So, what are the common mistakes startups, a lot of startups make? Sometimes I receive some certain emails that I know I did subscribe to this. Are you there, Deborah? I hope Deborah is here.
Yes.
Okay, okay. All right, all right. I received some emails from some startups, and I'm wondering, how did they get my email? I'm sure I didn't subscribe to this. I'm sure I didn't feed anything. I'm very certain. How do these people get my email? Right. So, what are the common mistakes, that startups make when handling data early on? And the part B of that question is that how do they balance, you know, not collecting the right data and not over collecting. I know you mentioned something about well, I feel, why are you asking me as a food vendor what my was just an example. We're not saying that, but why are you asking me a question that is not related to why I'm using your service or why I'm buying your products, right? So how do they balance, not ensuring that data that is collected is for growth, the growth of the business, and they are not over collecting and they are not creating risk for both themselves and also the consumer.
Mhm. So again, I think that's a great question. And the concept that you're referring of, the principle is called data minimization, right?
Yes.
And so to go back to that first initial question on, for startups, to get started, what should they be thinking about? So you see that I keep going back to this key idea of having to map out even before you get started. But let me also take a step back at this point, right? In going again to reference the
Okay, I
oh,
think it's the network. Okay, she's back. She's
can you
back.
hear me? Okay, my apologies. I'm not really sure how much was heard before I was kicked off, but let me start from the beginning. So I mentioned that the idea that you brought up, the concept is called data minimization, right? But data minimization, the very principle, again, this principle comes from the Act, right? This is the governing the NDPA, Nigeria Data Protection Act. Now, in starting up a business, the same way we do our own market analysis, right? That when you're going and you want to know who your competitors are. If you're having a food vendor, like your food vendor in Abuja versus Lagos, you have to understand how things are run in this individual states, right? Because it's very important. You want to understand what platforms are you using. The same thing applies here. If you're a startup, while you're looking into the political context Nigeria relates to your business, right? The financial context, the economical context of the country and how it relates to your business. You also have to understand the data protection space as it relates to Nigeria. That is also very, very key. So I think quite often people just skip over that and they say, okay, I have my CAC registration, I'm good to go. There's so much more than that. So for you to actually understand, what does that space look like? Data protection is a whole ecosystem in Nigeria right now, and it's continuing to evolve every single day. Take a step back in having to understand, what is a governing law in Nigeria as it relates to data protection and data privacy? What can I be held liable for? What is my obligation as a business owner collecting data? Having that understanding gives you a great foundation. Because I think quite often we're so used to be once, bit size of information here and there, but no, this is such a critical component. You cannot afford to skim through it. You need to understand what these key components are. The same way how you're building your structure, right? To be able to have a business that brings in revenue and is sustainable, you also need to understand, how do this data protection law in this country, how does that support the business that I have? And that is exactly what it is, right? The NDPA is not supposed to come in to somehow restrict your business. It's to help you do business the right way. So I would tell individuals, if you're a startup, if you have any excitement, right, for a passion that you want to turn that into a business, start by educating yourself. Educate yourself, understand what the law is in the country, right? Start there, because then you start to ask the right questions. You don't know what you don't know. The number of times I've met individuals and you're like, oh, I've never heard about this. I'm like, yes, great, but that is not an admissible defense in court. It's an admissible defense to the clients that you're supporting. Oh, I didn't know I had to protect you in this way. Oh, I didn't know that I had to secure data this way. They don't care. You have a responsibility the moment that you have been handed over that data. It becomes your responsibility. So you need to understand, by law, what am I liable for? By law, what am I responsible for? So I would advise every individual, again, both those are existing, those who are starting out, read the NDPA. There's also the guide that the NDPC had put out, which is the commission that they put out last year. And that's the General Application and Implementation Directive. So the NDPA can be a bit dense, so a bit more like the legal side. The guide shows you a breakdown of how to apply the law. What does it actually look like in practice? So read the NDPA, read the guide, right? And obviously, if you have any questions, GPA will be more than happy to support you and guiding you through that. Reach out to a DPCO, right? There are organizations who are licensed, right, like GPM, to be able to support businesses in understanding the law and how it applies to their sector, but also their own specific, let's say, their own peculiarities of their business. Reach out and ask questions. When you've done that, then you start to know the right questions to ask, and you start to understand what you're required to do based on law. So, for example, based on the NDPA, there are 3 different levels that a business or an entity can fall under. Extra high, so ordinary high, extra high, ultra high. The level that you're in is going to determine what your obligations are. Now, there are certain things that are very standard, but the law tells you that based on your level of processing, the threshold of data you're handling, right? The sensitivity of the data, do you have cross-border transfer, things like this, that will determine the level of requirements or obligations that you fall under. So again, you need to understand what the law is to then start applying that to your business. But what you have to do needs to be guided, right, by the existing frameworks in the country. So once you have that understanding, then you can start looking into some key things of like, okay, what are my obligations? Oh, I know I have to register with the NDPC. Get that done. Get a DPCO to be able to support you with that. Why I need to get audited? Once you then ask that question, okay, I need to get audited annually. What do I have to have in place to get audited? Then that takes us to, okay, what do I then need to have as a business before I get started? So these are some of the key things that, we want businesses to start really thinking about, right? And these are some of the mistakes that I think folks don't fall into because they don't have a clear understanding of what is the framework within Nigeria, right? Yes, it's what we have on a global scale, but again, you are in Nigeria, you have to contextualize whatever it is that you're doing. So I'm a big proponent of educating oneself, but also because you don't want to be diving into certain practices that may not even apply to you. Right. So if you're a small business and you fall under the ordinary level, you don't want to be paying to get audited annually, right? To submit a compliance audit return to the NDPC because it does not apply to you. Understanding where you fall, right, what category you fall under is then where you start to apply things. Now, again, the very basic things you need to have when it comes to data protection, those are guaranteed, right? You want to have things like awareness happening. You want to make sure every organization, for example, has to be registered. As long as you're processing higher than 200 software data within a span of 6 months, based on the law, you have to be registered, right? So all of these things start to show up. And then we go back to that point of privacy by design. Once you now understand what the regulatory framework looks like, the landscape is in Nigeria, then you can start having these specific things. Again, privacy by design. What am I doing? How can I embed data protection and privacy into this? What is the end user experience and how does that relate back to privacy? What am I doing to maintain access control, right? So all of these different things start to come into play. But I always say, folks, when you understand the depth and the breadth of what you're dealing with, then you can make informed decisions. The data you're collecting from your clients is to scale up the business that you have. but you need to have enough data to be able to inform your own decision as a business on how you need to appropriately, right, secure the data. Again, of the employees, customers, clients, all of that. But background for me, foundational, understand what it is, right? When you've done a deep dive into this landscape, right, then you understand what you're required to do. So as a startup, with that knowledge, you're equipped, because no one can then show up and tell you, oh, you have to do this, do that. You're like, no, 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 I don't, because I don't fall under that category. And you're also able to defend what you are doing. Because a big part of one key principle under data protection is accountability. When you have an understanding of who you are as a business, what you're doing, it's not enough to have the policy, it's not enough to have the culture. You also need to have evidence. You have to be able to demonstrate data protection by design, data protection by default. So when you start as a startup, as you start to think about this, you always say, okay, great. I know that I have to do this. Let me register. Here's my certificate for that. Right? Oh, I'm collecting this data, that data. How do I collect consent for that data? And is there going to be a spreadsheet for that where I actually document each client in the consent that they've actually provided to me? You know, you mentioned the example of someone reaching out to you about a new startup. Okay, how do I ensure I'm not falling in that same category? That every communication that goes out, marketing, we actually have consent for that, or we have a legitimate interest, which is one of the lawful basis for processing that's attached to that. But without understanding that you have 5 different lawful bases, you might think, oh, if I don't get consent from a client, I can't process that data. That's not true. There's consent as a lawful basis. You have legal obligation as a lawful basis. For example, as an employer, when you're processing things like let's say anything like pension or taxes, that's legal obligation. Whether or not your employee wanted, you're processing their data for their taxes, right? You have contractual necessity. If you have a contract with a client, right, and they give you permission, then you have that to process their data. There's vital interest, there's legitimate interest, there's public interest. So you need to understand, right, what are the different lawful bases and how do they back up what you're doing, right? How do they support the kind of data you need to collect as a business? That information is going to empower you, equip you, right, to then be able to build and build right, but most importantly, build in a way that's sustainable and also scalable as a business.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. I love this conversation. I love it. By now, you should, I mean, if you don't know anything about data privacy by now, I think if we decide to, set exam questions, you should pass right now. You should actually pass. Thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you. It's so interesting that, I love how you categorize those who might be needing, the privacy, from the ordinary to the extra high to the ultra high, so you should know the category that you fall under, very important. And then I love how you quantify that 200 pounds of data, if you process 200 pounds of data within 6 months, then you should, know that you have an obligation to the NDPA, right? A very serious obligation. So again, you just have to do the homework in house. What is 200 pounds of data to you, right? What does that mean to you? What's the definition of that for you? And as a data processor or controller, you're also liable. So don't say, oh well, I'm not. You are. Which brings me to, before I take this question that is on the chat box, which brings me to, as an employee, I don't understand that a lot of people right now will be thinking, well, this is holistic. They're talking about the organization as a whole, but you are the organization. Right? It's talking about the organization as a whole, but you are the organization. So as an employee, right, what do you think are the best practices for them to help the organization protect the data, even if they are yet to be compliant to the NDPA? Right?
Right.
Until, now we're saying we're having this conversation because we want people to be aware and to know that you have an obligation to ensure that you protect the data of your consumers, of your customers, of your clients, and even your employees internally and externally. Now, for internal measures, that is for the employees, what can they do? How can they ensure that the data of the organization is protected? And even if they feel that, well, our organization, they're not aware, how can they take this conversation back to their employer and initiate this conversation?
Of course. So that's great. Because quite often you hear individuals, when you hear data protection, automatically individuals are thinking of technology, technical measures. Oh, is there encryption? Is there passwords? And I quite often say that while technology is great, it's really the people that are the key drivers here, right? We're having this conversation right now. We're not having the conversation with technology. We're not having it with any technology. We're having it with individuals, because individuals are actually the key drivers, right? When it comes to data protection, technology matters, right? But the technology can only enforce what people design. So that's a key component of it. And an employer can go through a lens to have certain softwares in place. If the employees do not use that software appropriately, it's not redundant, but it's going to limit the effectiveness of that technology.
Absolutely.
So I would say some key things that employers can actually think about. A key component of that would be access control. So many organizations have this free for all concept, right? As long as you're not an employee of my business, I trust you. So everyone has access to every folder, every link, every database, every contact list, and that is not correct, because that is a massive risk. So there needs to be access control. So upper management, right, the executive level has to actually have some sort of policy because it actually shows, okay, who has access to what and for what duration. You see quite often sometimes that individuals would leave an organization, right, and still have access to the Google Drive folders. So someone who has left your organization 10 years ago can still access the documents that you are still updating on a regular basis with the data of different individuals. So access control is very important, and you need to have a policy that actually guides what that looks like. So what does the IT department have access to? What does HR have access to? If someone needs access to this, who would need to verify and give permission for that? And should that access be temporary or should it be permanent? So access control is a key component, right? Is it every spreadsheet you have or every document that should have a public link? No. Absolutely not. You know, so what it's rather than trying to make things so easy, we run the risk of, oh, we want things to be effective, we want them to be quick. We run a risk, right, of like just major violations of data protection rights. So access control is a really, really big one.
Yeah.
There has to be intentionality behind who has access to what. It can't be a free for all. You can't just have everything going anywhere. You have to be very, very careful. Another component I was saying, and this applies on a global scale, but I've seen this more often happening, at least within the context of Nigeria, is how often and how easy and acceptable it is to take confidential materials, right, and have them going through unsecure channels or personal channels. So you have your at work, you have your work laptop, or you have the desktop, and you see individuals then downloading data, downloading a report, this, that, and then having it on their personal phones, and then sharing it through WhatsApp or text messages, again, increasing the likelihood of a breach. So again, there has to be just focus on, okay, this is company data, this is official, this is personal. Now I know that it's very easy to merge, to blur those lines sometimes because of how fluid a business can be in Nigeria, but you have to be intentional about that. If you have your computer system, you have your antivirus, your anti-malware, you have all anti-ransomware secured in all of the spaces. If you're going to start using your personal devices for handling like company business, then every personal device also has to be protected. not just in terms of like the technical way, again, anti-ransomware, you have your antivirus, anti-ransomware. You also need to make sure that access control is also present for these personal devices. Because many individuals in their families, they get home, they put the laptops down, their kids use it to watch cartoons. Before you know, a child has gone to a different link, accidentally has sent something on WhatsApp. There has to be focus on what is this at this point. There's the access control that's happening, but again, being very intentional that there are boundaries on how you share data. Do you really need to send that spreadsheet of all your client files via WhatsApp? With their name, their information, their address, their phone number, their date of birth, is that really necessary? Being very, very mindful of that. Then the other key things that we can think about is as simple as even like password protection. How often do you change your password? Is something that is predictable? Are you applying best practices and having to get your password? And how often do you change that? Is this implemented on a company level where, an email is sent out every 6 months, for example, or 3 months, depending on other security measures you have in place, and okay, it's time to change your password. Right? Because again, there has to be a culture within the organization. Things like that also matter. It's been very, very intentional about that. I think I also mentioned data minimization earlier on. You as an employee, right? You need to be mindful as you're collecting data. Are you collecting more than you actually need? We give this example that there might be an individual who walks in and you're having a casual conversation with them. Man sees a woman, man likes a woman, and you're collecting data or whatever information it is. Do you need a phone number if it wasn't what's needed for that? Right? There's that purpose limitation. It's being very intentional. You're not collecting data you do not need as an employee as well. And being very mindful of that. Being very mindful of the links that you click on, right? Phishing is a very big thing. You get an email that says, oh, here is MTN credits for 50,000 naira. And before you know it's click, 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 click. But here's a discounted ticket to Dubai. Click, 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 click. We get very excited about things like this, but without having to check, about the security of these emails and where they're actually coming from. It's been very mindful that not every email that comes into your official email address means it's a clean official email. Right? Being very mindful of the exposure or how you're exposing your business or your employer, right? The company to attacks by the links that you actually click on, by websites that you go to, right? While you're connected to the internet, right? The shared internet that your other employees have access to, the same internet that's also hosting any cloud-based, you have to be mindful as an employee as well. Right. And I would say ask questions, be bold. That's also your responsibility as an employee is to do your part. I wouldn't say call your employer out, but talk to them. Oh, so I noticed that we're doing this, we're doing that. We managed to revisit this, based on this, based on that. It's okay to communicate that, right? Do your best to educate yourself as an employee as well. There are lots of courses out there on data protection. Go ahead, do it, and know that you have done your own due diligence, right? In making sure that as an employee, you're doing what needs to be done. But I would say certain things like that definitely go a long way, right? Making sure the data that's within your own control stays protected. Again, the emails are important, the kind of links you go to are important, what you're using your personal devices for, what you're showing your personal devices, access control is important. I would say, again, little things like you're leaving your desk, close your laptop, close your laptop. Your coworker has called you, oh, by the way, my laptop is down, can I quickly use your own? What's your password? No. Respectfully, no. Obviously, if you need to get permission for that, when that person is then, there has to be someone actually supervising that. I wouldn't recommend it, but in the case of in an emergency, maybe. But being very mindful, so we can't be so lax and wishy-washy about data protection, even on an employee level, right? A lot of data breaches that we see happen, not just in Nigeria, on a global level, like many of them actually start from individuals. Someone shared access they were not supposed to share. Someone clicked a link. Someone mishandled data. This is often what we see, right? So we need to understand that the employees are really key drivers, and it's important that we all understand our own responsibility as individuals, also in how we contribute to the bigger whole for the organization, and do our own due diligence and check off the boxes where we need to. The little things matter. They build up, and I think employees are just very key in ensuring compliance within any organization.
Oh. Okay, right. That was, I mean, how many people? I hope you're all taking notes. I hope so, because some people eventually would have to pay a lot of money to get this information. Trust me. But this has come to you on a platter of gold, free. Remember, they say there's no free lunch anywhere. So if you don't make use of this very free lunch, it would mean that you have to pay for it in the future. All right, thank you so much. I would quickly like to take this question here by Simon Aggie. It says, as a company, if we organize a physical seminar or a webinar, it is an opportunity to collect data like prospective customer information. Apart from communicating with the attendees on the subject of the seminar or webinar, is it okay for us to reach out to the attendees to introduce our other businesses to them?
That is a great question. That is a great question, and it's actually a question that comes up quite often when we have a first-time client and we're having this discussion. I will always say err on the side of caution. So you have individuals who are showing up for your program, whether that be virtual or even in person. It doesn't hurt to literally have a disclaimer that says, by providing your information, you are giving your consent for us to reach out to you about our businesses, and that's it. While you're filling out the form online, so there's a registration form for whatever business it is, or sorry, whatever webinar that you're hosting, at the point in which the intended recipient or attendee is about to click, there can be a box. Again, don't make it so tiny that they don't see it, because one of the requirements, right, is about privacy. It's like it has to be, you have to give this information in a way that is transparent, in a way that's legible. So it can't be like in the tiniest font. It can't be a pre-clicked box either. Let them provide consent. If that consent is not there, like as I mentioned, there are different lawful bases, right? Quite often, where we see on marketing, there's a lawful base that's called legitimate interest. So this legitimate interest means that you're processing data for you to be able to carry out your own function as an organization. But a key part of that is that it cannot override the rights of the data subject. So there is a legitimate interest assessment that you can do, and there is a template actually that's been made available by the NDPA, where you can run this assessment on whatever you're about to do to say, okay, do we actually have legitimate interest here to process certain data without consent? But I will always say, where you can get consent, that is the safest bet for you outside of like legal obligation or public interest. Where you can get consent, get consent. Right, we're in a digital space right now. If you're creating your form, remember, data protection, data privacy by design. When you're creating this form to collect information, already tell them, hey, by filling out this form, you're giving us consent, to process your data for it to be a part of this training, but also to reach out. It can even be two separate boxes, because again, the thing is, you don't want to have multiple, let's say, needs or ask and then have one consent box, right? So you can see actually for many organizations, if you look at them on their website or even many events that you might go to, you would have the place where it says, oh, I give consent to process my data towards this activity, towards events. There's going to be a separate line item and then it says, I provide consent to process to receive promotional materials and additional information about this business. My recommendation would even have it as two separate things, right? Because you don't want to overlap consents, where it sounds like if I don't give consent for you to send me promotional materials, then I don't have consent to be a part of your event. You want to avoid that. So get their consent. Now, in the instance in which you have already sent out this information, right, without consent, and let's say you don't even have a legitimate interest behind that, this email should also be accompanied with a disclaimer that individuals not interested in receiving further information can unsubscribe. if you've already gone to the point where you've already sent the email, right? Or let's say you have the assumption that they give consent, or maybe they did give consent, you still, one of the key rights of every data subject is the right to withdraw consent, right? To stop processing or restrict processing. So when you send out communication, you need to make sure that you have made it possible for individuals to be able to withdraw consent at any time, or restrict the processing that you have of their data. So you sent them information after a training, great. Oh, thank you for your time. Thank you for, again, if you would like to unsubscribe from this newsletter or you're saying no to future communication around this, kindly unsubscribe to our email at privacy@XYZ company.
Mm.
Because then you've given them the opportunity to be able to say, I don't want this anymore. Right? But before you get there, you want to get consent or have a legitimate interest. At the point in which you've skipped that point, you sent that email, you need to give the data subject have them exercise their right to say, I do not want this anymore. So that for me would be very key. I understand that we all are trying to like build our businesses. So absolutely, yes, yes, yes. But again, data minimization is very, very key. You need to get your consent where you can. Sometimes we think many of things are 4 or 5 steps needed. No, it's just a simple disclaimer, a privacy notice. They need to be informed, and you need to give them the ability or the space or the environment to exercise the rights that they have without any punishment or negative impact on them for saying no to you as a business.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you so much. So if anyone is here, ensure that disclaimer, write it boldly, boldly written, ensure that disclaimer is there. Very important, very, very, very important. So if anybody wants to contribute, has questions, just could you drop it on the comment section or use the quick the Q&A button. Kindly use the Q&A button. If you have any questions whatsoever, use the Q&A button, and then we're going to take your questions. And also, if you have comments, you have something to say, kindly drop it on the chat box. Would love to hear from you. Thank you very much. So we're going to just go straight on to the NDPA. I know you do a whole lot of things with, the Nigerian Data Protection Commission. It's very important that we actually talk about them. That's the body that regulates data in Nigeria. So again, how does the NDPC, shape how businesses handle data? And at what point, although you already mentioned that this, the ordinary, the extra high, the ultra high, you already mentioned it, but, what are those regulations that they have in place that might, well, we'll come back to that second question. But first, what is the role of the NDPA in Nigeria? And, what are the risks that comes with businesses that ignore these regulations?
Of course. So that's a great question, Anu. Thank you. So, as you rightfully said, the NDPC, the Nigeria Data Protection Commission, is the regulatory body in Nigeria, right, that governs everything around data protection and data privacy. So they set the regulatory obligations, right, expectations for businesses. So you also, again, mentioning the 3 different levels. So the ordinary high, extra high, and ultra high. So the commission has put out the act, the NDPA, that is the law that's governing, again, data protection in Nigeria. So the commission's role here, right, setting those expectations, which they've done via the NDPA, right? They have obligations they put out that you can have through that you can actually access to, again, the NDPA or the guide, which I mentioned earlier on, the general application and implementation directive. So they've put out a couple of different documents, press releases, guidances. So you can actually go on their website on the resources to have access to these different documents I'm referencing right now. So they set the regulatory expectations. They also define accountability standards. So they define what sort of artifacts you're supposed to have in order to demonstrate compliance. Like, what are this? How do you show as a company that you are in fact in compliance, like with the NDPA, which again is structured and created and designed for the for the protection of data subjects. So that is sort of like where you show up with that, right? They define the accountability standards in that space. How are we going to check an organization is actually in compliance, right? Whether that's looking at the technical measures, the organizational measures, so things like, as I mentioned, are you registered? And what does that say about your organization, right? Have you been audited? What does that say about your organization? Do you have privacy notices on every sort of engagement entry point with users and with data subjects? So they define what accountability is going to look like for organizations, but they also enforce. So as they are the regulatory body in Nigeria, they do have the power, right, invest in them to be able to enforce, and go after entities or businesses that are non-compliant. So based on the NDPA, an organization or an entity can be fined as high as 2%, right, of their gross from the preceding year, or 10 million, right, whichever is sort of higher. Now, if you're an organization that's working within the millions or the billions, even having to be charged 0.1% of your gross from your preceding year is a lot of money. That's a lot of money. So they have the ability to be able to enforce that. Now, whether that may look like, the fines, there's also prison time. That could be, also put out depending on the level of the breach. There's also just been sanctioned, there's been taken to court. So the NDPC has the power to be able to go after organizations that, again, are not compliant, and it can actually enforce what the NDP has put out to be law. Because once you are going against that, once you're violating that, then you could be held liable, right? So the penalties do have to apply. So the NDPC, as it stands, again, are very key. They set what the standards are, the expectations are going to be, right? What are your obligations? Based on the different levels that you're at, what are you required to do by law? Again, they define what accountability is. So we can say the NDPA is a document. We can say you should have privacy notice, or you should have appropriate security measures, but there has to be a way of measuring that. There has to be a way of saying, okay, if you do this, this, and that, then I can consider this to be evidence, right, of you demonstrating compliance towards this specific, line item about data protection. So they define what accountability is. They define what compliance is and how to demonstrate that. And then they also have the power to be able to enforce whatever are the penalties or the consequences, let's say, of non-compliance in that space. So the NDPC, I would say, if I had to summarize, this would be like the three major components that we see them show up. Again, landscape, what is what, how do we show or how do we prove what you say that you're doing? And then for those who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, how do we get them to do said thing, right? And typically that comes through some level of penalty or sanction, or for example, they could restrict an organization from processing future and processing further data. And again, obviously that would be impacting the operations of a business. So they do have the right to do that if you are suspected or if you are found to be in violation of data subject rights.
Awesome. Yeah, well, that's a great commission. I want to believe that, there are businesses that has gone through, some sanctions, from the NDPC. And I'd just love to hear from you, what business do you think, or just give us a scenario without, of course, exposing their data. Just give us a scenario, a case study of a company or a business in Nigeria that had to go through the sanctions of the NDPC because they were not compliant.
Yes. So, so believe it or not, I think the times when I've spoken to individuals, again, business owners, and they say, well, I mean, no one is liable, no one is being punished. And I actually say to them, all you have to do is go on the internet and click on NDPC fines, or NDPC investigations, and you're going to see a whole list, just last year, the NDPC had again press release statement saying that they were already investigating over 1,000 businesses. Right? Many individuals already at this point have already been investigated and have been fined. So what we're seeing is when there are reports of breaches, for example, right, the NDPC does have the right to investigate. What others don't also realize is that individuals can in fact write to the NDPC if they suspect you of a breach, saying, hey, we would like for you to investigate XYZ company because we believe that they are in violation of this, that, and the third. We've had businesses that have been fined and investigated, again, fined, by the way, millions of naira, that they have been fined because they did not have the appropriate lawful basis for the data that they were processing. So we think that these things are insignificant, but they're actually very key. Oh, you've collected certain data that's sensitive. Did you get consent before having to process them? You got consent to process the data, but did you then process the same data for another purpose that the data subject was not aware of, right? So we actually had without calling names, a bank that was actually fined as a result of that, where they were processing data without the appropriate lawful basis. Right. So that is one example. We have a very key prominent organization of business also here in Nigeria that were also fined as a result of inappropriate measures in place for cross-border transfer or unlawful cross-border transfer. So that means, you're collecting or processing the data of Nigerians, but then you're also transferring that out of Nigeria. Did you have certain measures in place? Did you check if the country in which the data is being transferred to, if they have the appropriate measures, So that cross-border transfer is a big thing, because once the data of Nigerians are actually leaving Nigeria, you also need to make sure that there's due diligence that has been taken to ensure the protection of that data. Because again, this is still the data of Nigerians, whether or not it's in Nigeria, right? So we had an organization that were also penalized as a result of that. So again, these things do show up in different ways. Do you have the appropriate lawful basis? Are you sticking to purpose limitation, which is not processing beyond what you've collected the data for? And again, cross-border transfer, are you in violation of that? Has there been a reported breach, and what did you have measures in place already to mitigate that breach, and how was your response like towards rectifying whatever damage it is? So this is what we are seeing for organizations that are operating in Nigeria, right? It doesn't take much. Again, there's even a list that was published last year, by the NDPC. I think a major newspaper also carried that list of organizations within from the financial sector to the startups, to ICTs, to banks, to pensions. The list, literally the names of all of these organizations, were publicly listed as being non-compliant. Now you can only imagine the reputational hit. So again, I tell businesses it's better to be proactive about this, because many people say, oh, the NDPC is never going to find me. When they find you, then what? When they find you, then what? It's rather be proactive and have the peace of mind that you need to operate as a business owner. Because if you're waiting for a breach to happen, or you're waiting for there to be an investigation, then you're simply just going to be responding to a crisis. And you don't want that to happen, right? Because it doesn't. The NDPC is being very proactive right now. Nigerians are amazing people, but sometimes you need a bit of teeth to be able to get businesses to comply in the way that they're supposed to. So investigations across different sectors are going out. Just last year, the NDPC also put out a press release about businesses falling under the educational sector as well, right? So schools, tertiary institutions. So they are not discriminating at all. If you're processing data, right, then this applies to you. But again, organizations or businesses that typically fall within that startup, technology, finance, pension, health, yes. They are finding, and they are finding big. And I tell individuals, like, yes, you can think about the heavy hit on your finances, but nowadays trust is very viewed. it's very, very hard to rebuild, because the moment that there is some sort of news coverage about your organization having to have exposed the data of individuals and no one knows what has happened to that, individuals are pulling out so quickly because everyone understands the gravity of the data that they are giving to you. So even if somehow you're able to pay the fines, what does that mean for your business next year, 5 years from now, 10 years? Because there's always going to be that news coverage, or once upon a time, this happened and they could not secure the data within their control. The gravity of that, that's not something that any business should risk. I would say that. Because to risk that is to risk the growth, is to risk the very essence of the business that you were trying to protect. In protecting your business, you need to protect data because it is intrinsically linked at that point.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You mentioned something about older people. If a consumer feels that has been violated, they can actually sue or they can actually report to the NDPA.
Yeah.
But I'll come back to that. I know that Dr. Raji has a question, and then he has a comment. We're going to unmute him now. Also, please check the chat for links to the NDPA, the data guidance, and also, links and informations that to companies that have been fined by the NDPA. Kindly download those links as they won't be available after this webinar. All right, I think we have Dr. Raji now. So you can unmute yourself from your end. All right, we have him.
Thank you very much, Anon. And I said good afternoon now to everyone. And then Deborah, it's nice seeing you here. Good afternoon. I hope you are well. I can see that you are doing very well.
Thank you.
And I want to say well done for a very good job. I think you have done great justice to this topic. But I have a question and maybe two comments. Now, let me go with the question first. You talk about data minimization. And I mean, some people think within themselves, especially knowing now the gravity of data protection. Say, look, I want to avoid this risk. I don't want to get involved here at all. And so all I'm going to do, I don't want to minimize. I don't want to collect. I just want to do my business and walk away. Now, you need to then look at this and juxtapose it with, is it actually possible? Once upon a time in this country, you can get a SIM without any data. I mean, you walk to a store and buy a SIM and you use it. Then security issue came on board, and the government said, no, you have to provide your ID, you have to provide anything. You can't just get a SIM. I mean, I travel everywhere across the world. You get to the airport, you cannot get a SIM without your ID. So is this risk avoidable at all? Going by what is happening, not just in Nigeria, but globally. So that we need to begin to set our mind. If I know this is not a risk I can avoid, then I better start designing it now into my business from the start of whatever I get to know. But if it's possible to avoid completely, then maybe then I would just, somebody who is risk averse will just say, look, I avoid this. I'll take no data. But I would not get to go to a time when regulations will say you can't do business with an unknown people. You have to know them. You have to identify them. So if you can't identify them, then you can't deal with them. Because we need to be able to see traceability. Who did you transfer this business with? Should there be a problem tomorrow? I don't know if you'd like to address this quickly before I go to my comments. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Raji. And I think, again, you bring up a very great point. And let me start off by saying, as an individual who actually started off as a researcher initially, I understand the importance of collecting appropriate data and sufficient data to be able to complete whatever the purpose is for. So I understand that. Now, I always speak both from this space of, again, from being a researcher and within the space of data protection. What I have found is that quite often, sometimes, it's not a matter of needing more data. It's about using the data that you have effectively. There are times where we collect data that we think is going to be helpful or relevant, but there really is no purpose to it. Now, Sad, the example that you gave of back in the day, no one can go in and then just get the SIM card, and then and nowadays you have to give your ID and other means of verification. What we see is that companies are requiring this as part of a key lawful basis, right, which is legitimate interest. And that leads back to fraud prevention. But the key thing to be mindful of here is that even with this additional information that is being collected, there is a lawful basis that's attached to it. So when we say data minimization, we're not pushing to say, oh, collect the bare minimum that is going to interfere with your operation as a business. We're saying, understand your, that's the point of that data mapping, understand your operation, right? Understand what it takes for you to run your business, and then collect data that matches, that is in fact commensurate to that. Don't collect what will be helpful or relevant down the line. If you're collecting data and you say, okay, I need to process this amount of data to be able to provide this service, but I need this additional information based on legitimate interest for fraud prevention, you have the right to collect that information. Where we see issues or problem is that people collect data that is not linked to a purpose, right? And there is no lawful basis that's attached to it. That's where the problem is. So it's not necessarily the data itself, right? It's, do you have a purpose that's attached to it and a lawful basis that's attached to that purpose? If you do, as a business, you're allowed to collect that data, because down the line, really, you want to see data as an asset. The moment that you start to collect excessive data, if anything, it becomes a burden to your organization, because number one, now you have more data that you have to protect, more data that you have to secure. You also have a greater likelihood of whatever breach, because if that data was never in your control, if there's a breach that should happen, you didn't lose access or give unauthorized access to that data because you never had it in the first place. But if there should be a breach and there's data that's exposed that you were never supposed to have in the first place, that's just putting your business at a higher risk. Now, another key lawful sort of data protection principle that can also help in this space is around data retention. Right. So you have data minimization, right? Collect the minimum sort of, again, what is relevant and adequate for you to process or to carry out your business activities, right? You have the lawful basis attached to it, but it's also data retention. So let's say for the period in which you're processing a person's data for, let's say, this activity, you need this key information. When you are done with that purpose or that activity, right, you need to understand what is the retention period for that. Internally, there needs to be a data retention policy that is based on what is, let's say, what do you call it? Sorry, statutory for your sector, for example. So, for example, PENCOM might set what should be retention rates, right? You have different other regulatory bodies that set within each sector. They tell you have this data for as long as this amount of time. Then understand within your own company as well what is your retention policy. So many of these things, these principles, they do not operate in silos. So you don't pull out data minimization and say, oh, this is the thing that we're doing. No. It's literally supposed to be a holistic view. So when you have data retention, right, policies, right, so you have that, you have storage limitations, and that's the major principle. You have storage limitation, you have purpose limitation, you have data minimization, you have security, you have accuracy, you have accountability. All of these principles actually work together side by side. And when you're implementing them in a holistic manner, you will see that data minimization, if anything, works as an asset, as an advantage for your company and not the other way around. So I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, back to my comment. Now, for greater part of this discourse, we have seen, data. We have seen data privacy from the compliance point of view. Maybe we've also seen it from some business point of view. But I also wanted us to see it from a survivor point of view. Now, and also from best practice point of view, it is okay to imbibe this principle, to be compliant, because there is a law that you need to comply to. But it is much more important to know that it is also a survival requirement. Now, you've talked about data being intrinsically linked to your business. Well, I tell people that the data is your business. Imagine a bank. Imagine a bank, however big the bank is, that wake up the next morning and all the customer database is gone just because of a breach. The bank is gone down, and it can happen. And the issue is that the rate at which this happen, or the speed at which this can happen, can be unimaginable. You can see a company called Aeron, for example. I mean, probably some people know about Aeron some years back. We woke up one day, one of the largest corporations in the world. We wake up one day and Aeron is gone overnight. It's like a dream, but it's gone. That's the end. And this is what can happen. You can put, even when you put a lot of security in place, people still try to breach data. I mean, for fraud reasons, for many other reasons. Now imagine this era where you have AI, where I don't have to do anything. I just need to get an AI to be tried. Take something as simple as your password. I mean, put an AI on it to be trying all kind of password. It won't take him 1 year to find your password. It won't take him a year. I mean, for a human being, it can take you a long time. And it doesn't cost me anything to put an agent there and just try your password, or get into your network and just trying to break into your network. Now, even with protection, with security, the risk is still there, and the risk is very high. Then imagine a company that have no such in place. So we should even drive these from the perspective of survivor. Any organization, no matter how big or small it is, that is not compliant is at the risk of extinct. It can go off the radar at any point in time. And this is very real. This is very key. You won't even have the opportunity to remedy it. There will be no opportunity, because your data is gone, your business is gone. There's no other way. You're just extinct overnight. So I believe that when you are doing the right thing, maybe to protect your customer, you are indirectly protect yourself. In fact, you are the biggest beneficiary of it, and not the customer. You are the first beneficiary. So when people begin to see the advantage, I go to school and I have to read. I don't read because I really like to study. I read because I have to pass the exam. But in the process, I get educated because I have to study, because I need to understand and then write the exam. So I get educated. That education is what is helping me today, not the exams. Even though the exam was the motivator for my education or the certificate. I'm living what I know today. I'm practicing what I know today, and it's sustaining my life. So I believe that we all, as organizations, even as individuals, we need to begin to see data protection from the point of view of survivor. For us, we are the first beneficiary before any other person. And you have explained clearly that it's not about technology, because people are behind technology. You do the design. Things like access control that you mentioned is huge. We are very, very lazy when it comes to access control. Everybody can access anything at any time. And you never know who came to that organization, even though as an employee, but to spy or to cause an havoc. Or you don't know who is influencing the guy that is next to you. You never know. So if we go by this principle, like you said, you just get access to what you need as an example, then we will protect our business. We will protect our life. Again, for some people, especially entrepreneur, business is their life, because you use your life to build a business. People trusted you, and overnight the data is gone, your business is gone. You will die before you know. You will just see that you're already dead before you realize that, oh, I'm dead. Because you can't sustain it, you can't survive it, you can't take it. It's too much a weight on you. All these can be avoided if we become compliant with data protection. If we design, if we design privacy, into our business at any point in time. You've also explained that even if you have started, you don't know. Any point in time, you realize that this is missing. Sit down and understand what you need to do, and then go from there. So there's no excuse. Oh, I don't know. I started 10 years ago. It wasn't this common. Now that you know, is the time to do it. There's never time that is too late to be right. Anytime you realize that you are wrong is the best time to be right. And you start from there. So that's my comment. I just want us people to see that we need to start looking at survivor also as a key factor that is driving our data protection. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much, sir.
very
Like
much.
you hit I feel like you hit that was a nail on the head with that. We keep saying like data protection is no longer a support for at this point. It really is a business model. And it's the only business model that is going to ensure the sustainability of any business operating within the era that we are in right now. Like when it comes to AI is great. It's added value to organizations. It's also introduced a lot of vulnerabilities, right? Technology is a tool. It is great. There are advantages to it. Data is, again, advantages to it. That's what you're going to use in terms of your business continuity. But how you use that is going to determine a lot. Bridges are no longer something that we hear of like once every 10 years anymore. They're happening so often and they're so quiet now. So often, and we don't even realize the how often it is, the frequency of it, but they are to be expected. You have a business right now, you're going in with the mindset that someone wants what you have. So what are you going to do to protect it? Because your business is your data. So great, amazing. Thank you so much for adding to the conversation.
Thank you very much, sir, for holding to discover. Of course, you have a doctor in the house. What do you expect? You would definitely have, something really great to add to conversation. Because we are running against time, I would like to collapse, one more question. I mean, two more questions into two, and then we can, wrap it up. Let's talk about AI, right? There's AI cloning, and I'm glad Dr. Raji also mentioned that there's AI cloning, there's fraud going on. The other day, I saw I think on Instagram or YouTube, someone took the voiceover of a very reputable man of God in the country and placed it over a product that, of course, he didn't, of course, it's not his. He didn't even publish the book, nothing, but took his voiceover and placed it over that product just to lure people to say this product is for him. Now, the caption was also coined in a way that, seemed like this person is the owner of this book, so purchase this book. It has been written by him, right? Now, that's for me, that's a damage because we don't know what the content of the book is. We don't know whether it's misleading or not. And that's a reputational damage. Someone after reading it would say, oh, it was because I read this book and it was so and so person that published it, or it was so and so person that advertised it, when in the real case it was otherwise, right? So what do we do? What are the best practices to ensure that AI cloning, fraud, with the entire fraud happening, identity fraud? How do we ensure that we guide against reputational damage? And then the other question is that, how much of data privacy is more of a people problem than a technology problem? Because for me, if someone takes my voiceover and places it over a product that I didn't write, I didn't produce, that's a people problem. It's not a technology problem. I mean, I think so. That's you. It's on you. It's because you do not have reputation, you do not have integrity, and that's why you can do that, right? And then what are the training and awareness that we can put out there? A lot of people, you see a lot of pastors, fake accounts, fake accounts. It's not me. It's not this. It's not me. Even companies are beginning to say fake accounts, fake this person. What can we do? What are the best part? What measures can we put in place to at least prevent against this?
Okay. So thank you, Anu. Let me start with the very first question. I do believe that's the one regarding AI, and I believe company reputation, right? So as I mentioned previously, every other sentence, I think, when we think about whether it's business or personal life, is AI this, AI that, AI this, AI that, right? And AI is in fact a tool. AI has become so, so valuable. But as I mentioned earlier on, it's also introduced a lot of vulnerabilities that we have to be mindful of. Now, for organizations and individuals that have such a public facing I would say components embedded in who they are and what they do. For example, this prominent individual that you mentioned, their faces are out there, right? I'm assuming this person has their own Instagram account that has their face and has their voice. So that is there. Can you, as an individual, stop another individual or group from taking your voice and your picture and doing something with it? No. Unfortunately, we cannot, right? Because we cannot control what other individuals are doing. So I would say a couple of key things. Number one, that's why things like the NDPA are so important. Because in the case in which you do identify an issue like that, you then have the right to be able to take someone to court, for example, you've been able to identify who's behind this malicious act, right? You have the ability to be able to exercise those rights. Now, as an individual, what I would recommend, for example, let's say one key thing is this called privacy notice. And you will see that there are organizations already that already have this quite obvious, like obviously placed across every client facing I would say platform. So this disclaimers, for example, go something along the lines of this is the official Instagram page or website for this organization, right? Do not purchase anything that is not directly received from this website. Any information that is received about this organization, verify. So privacy notices like that or disclaimers like that go a very, very long way. Now, is it possible that individuals can still be scammed because they're not referring back to your own website? Yes, but remember I mentioned a key thing about demonstrability, right? You can demonstrate that you have put in strategic places privacy notices to inform data subjects that engage with you as an individual or your business. That's a key thing. Even down to having these disclaimers in all of your communication. So for example, we tell our clients, even we have there's a disclaimer that's attached whenever I get an email from me. I know you would have seen that disclaimer attached to my signature. It's going to say, again, we're not held liable, right? If you take certain information without verifying. If an individual, an employee should communicate certain things, it is the opinion of said employee and does not necessarily reflect the views or the opinions of the company. These privacy notices have to be obvious, they have to be transparent, they have to be visible. So having things like that on your IG page, on your Twitter page, this is the official link for my organization. This is the official
Okay, looks like she'll come around. I guess it's a network. Okay, Deborah, are you back? Okay.
Yes, I'm back. My apologies. I think the internet threw me off for a second. But the key thing is, you can have these privacy notices to be able to inform individuals, right? Data subjects on how they can verify information coming from you. This is our official YouTube channel. If you need to purchase something, here's our official business site. Like we even have certain key public organizations, right, that and government agencies that also run into similar issues where fake websites have been created and they now have to start putting out disclaimers. Here is the official. Look at gov.ng. Be very mindful. So this kind of notices need to be made available. You need to keep your data subjects informed, right, of how, tell them, here's what we're doing to protect you. Here's what you need to do to also protect yourself. But as long as you've done what you need to do, right, and you can demonstrate that by law, you're secured. Is that sufficient? Not always. We live in a world where unfortunately people are taking advantage of these tools and these technologies that are available, but you just need to make sure that the measures that you put in place, right, they are commensurate to the level of risk or breach or incident that could possibly arise. If you have done that, you can demonstrate that, then you're in a good enough standing. And as you go over time, you continue to improve on the measures that you have. So I hope that answered that question before I get to the other one.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And I think the other question then was about employees.
Employees,
I
yes.
believe employees. And so I know we already earlier on we had talked about certain sort of like best practices for employees. So
For employees,
this
yeah.
particular question you're asking, so remind me, you're asking what can employees
Yes, what can
do
employees do?
still?
What should they start doing? What are the best practices? How can they protect the data, or how can they use data in the organization? And if they feel that the employer is not aware about data privacy, how can they take that conversation to the employer and table it to say, look, we think that we're not doing the right thing here. I'll give you an example. The people we share documents with. When you mentioned earlier that you share documents via WhatsApp, right? People, employees have actually shared documents with me via WhatsApp. And sometimes I say, please kindly send it, via the email so that we can trace this, right? So that, and sometimes it's not a document, it might be an information. Why not just, document this, send it to me via email so that we can trace this conversation, right? Because I want to believe that is also another form of, data collation so that we can trace this information. Now, as an employee of an organization, how should they, what are the best practices for them? What should they do? Where should they even start? Because already they have, documents scattered everywhere on Google Drive, on, OneDrive, on their laptops. What should they do? How can they consolidate all of this data that, are everywhere and consolidate it into one place and ensure that they comment, they comment the best practices of data privacy?
Okay, that is great. So Anu, before I answer that question, let me say something. When the NDPA, right, relates to data controllers and data processors as entities, as businesses, right? So what does this mean in practice? If an individual with an organization should, let's say, click on a link that then leads to some kind of attack, and there is a breach. If the NDPC, the commission, is going to go after anyone, they're going after the organization. So I just want to make that sort of like that distinction clear. They're going after the organization. Now, can that organization then take certain measures or lawful acts against the employee? Yes. But the NDPC and the NDPA at this point, right, is actually looking at the entity. I say that because while I encourage individuals and employees in being very mindful of their own practices, it is very key that we understand the responsibility of the organization as a whole. The individuals make up the organization, but the organization needs to have a structure. Now, if we start to target individual, or what can you do, what can you do, the problem is my own definition of data protection might be different from yours. Like, I think I actually change my password every 10 days because I'm paranoid that way. And you might feel like, well, I think that a year is sufficient. Now, or you think that 30 days is sufficient. And one can argue for both, right? Okay, 10 days is actually, it makes sense that I'm being rather aggressively proactive, yes, but 30 days is actually not a bad period or duration for changing your password. Now, then we're having different things happening. And this can create a certain level of disconnect, I believe. So it's important that organizations have the structure in place to guide employees, right? So, for example, I mentioned the password policy earlier on. If the company says our policy as an organization is to make sure that that employees change their password every 30 days or every 60 days. Then you know that you can hold employees liable, right? You can say, hey, there was this policy and you violated or you did not comply. So it's being able to have things like that in place, even down to data minimization, right? You can say, okay, I can, like I mentioned, so in best practices ahead of time, don't collect data that you're not going to be using. Now, if there is no official procedure or policy for the organization, and an employee should do that, what are we using? What are we saying? Hey, by the way, you violated what? But if, again, by design, this organization already has forms that only get name, number, and request for service, then the employee cannot then somehow insert a new column that says date of birth, NIN, because the structure, the policy, the forms, everything the company has created already has data protection embedded within it. So I do believe that the employer has a role to play in leading and guiding their employees. You need to create an environment that is conducive, right, and nurturing of best practices. If as an employee, I'm very mindful of what I need to do, but 10 others don't care, I alone cannot secure that company. So the individual, the organization needs to be mindful. Do we have technical measures in place, right? Do we have policies and procedures in place? Do we have an information security policy? Do we have a data protection policy? Do we have a data breach or incident management policy, right? Do we have a privacy policy, a cookie policy? Do we have an HR policy that tells our employees what they can and cannot do, right? When it comes to confidentiality, what they can and cannot carry or take, or data they're not allowed to transfer. Do we have a bring your own device policy for those who encourage people to use their laptops in the office? So the employees can do, yes, but there needs to be structure around what they're doing, right? Because what we see is there's certain companies that have the policies, but then there is no implementation or enforcement. So I think it sort of goes hand in hand. You want employees you want a culture, right? That is forward thinking and proactive when it comes to data protection. You need to also give your employees the space and the structure and the resources to be able to abide by these best practices. But I don't want to sort of single out employees and say, oh, it's your responsibility. Like, yes, the employees make up the companies, but the companies have a responsibility to their employees, right? So for example, one of the key requirements under the NDPA is at minimum annual training for your staff regarding data protection, at minimum. So you're still supposed to have, an internal schedule for regular training, right? At minimum, you need to at least bring in, for example, a consultant like a DPC or like GPM associate to come in to train your staff, refresh your course on an annual basis at minimum. They don't know what they don't know. They are not the experts in this space. What is data? What is sensitive data? How do you report an incident? How do you report a breach? All of these things matter, right? So, but again, at the very bare minimum, employees check your passwords, access control, check the links that you click on, be mindful of the sites that you go to, data minimization, delete what you're not using, don't use your personal devices for things for the business. All these different things come in play. But when you have a company that has already listed these procedures and these policies, and the staff always has something to guide them. They have something to go back to. They're not guessing what is best practices, what is best practice. They're being told what is best practice for them as an employee. And as long as they are under your organization, they're required by law to abide with your own policy and procedure as an organization. And I think that is what is very, very important for us to actually keep in mind there.
Thank you very much. That was amazing. I mean, you'd all agree with me that 2 hours is not enough to do justice to this topic. It's not enough. We started this conversation at 11 a.m. and this is almost 1 p.m. Right, 8 minutes short of 2 hours. Right, so I know that you have questions. There's a question from Oluwaseyi from Ayomiko. It says, at what point the Nigerian Company legally required to appoint a DPO? Can it be outsourced? NDPA versus GDPR for companies serving both Nigerian and EU users. Why do NDPC and GDPR clash most? What standards should we design to? Or which standards should we design to? I think that's just, if we can answer that question in 2 minutes, then.
Of course. So very briefly, that's a really great question. So the GDPR is one of the I would say foundational, very early on regulations or guidance towards data protection. Now GDPR is mostly applying to again, let's say like the EU, right? So the NDPA is what we have for Nigeria. Now, the GDPR has heavily influenced the development of the NDPA. The GDPR, right, has influenced the development of the NDPA. But when it comes to what you are liable for, right, or what you can be I guess the assessment, the measurement, the accountability, all of that relates to compliance. You're looking at the NDP as long as you're dealing with Nigerians, right? If you're processing data of Nigerians, then the NDPA is the key document, the key law, the key regulation that guides that. The GDPR is an amazing document for you to read on, but you will see a lot of overlap between the GDPR and the NDPA. But the NDPA, as a business operating in Nigeria for Nigerians, the NDPA is what you look at. Again, even down to data subject rights, the principles, you will see that overlap. The NDPA has certain key nuances to it. So, for example, it's a key right, which is the right to lodge a complaint with the NDPC that you don't see as a specific right within the GDPR, right? So you will see some additions to the NDPA that would not be present within the GDPR. So just very quickly, the NDPA is what is contextualizes data protection to Nigeria. Follow that. GDPR is an amazing document to study, an amazing guidance also for best practice. Now, regarding the question of a DPO, that's a really great question, Ayo. Now, a DPO stands for a data protection officer. Now, based on the NDPA by law, you are required to have a DPO for your company, as long as you're an organization that either falls under ordinary, extra, or ultra high. You are required by law to have an individual that becomes the key person that is responsible, right, for sort of providing guidance, for communicating with the NDP. So you need to have a DPO. Now, what you will see is that DPO would then liaise with your DPCO, your your data protection compliance organization, like GPM Associates. They would work with us. They would work with the NDPC. They would also be responsible for doing certain key things like your SAPR, your semi-annual data protection sort of audits that happens within the organization. They would be in charge of doing maybe like quarterly training around data protection or monthly training around data protection, right? So this becomes the individual, think of them as your HR head, like the way you have IT lead. This becomes your compliance lead. Your DPO becomes your compliance lead. So this is an individual that you must have within your organization. Can this be outsourced? Yes. The reason why is many organizations do not currently have an individual who is licensed, right, or has the proper certification to sit in as your DPO. So your DPO can't just be anyone. It has to be someone who has been trained appropriately within the space of data protection. So this individual can then sit and inform the organization. Someone who does not know cannot show others, right? The blind cannot lead the blind. So if you have someone within your organization who is in fact qualified, then they can sit in as your DPO. When you register your organization with the NDPC, you have to put in the information of your DPO and their certifications. If the NDPC does not see or deem this person qualified, then that registration would be denied, right? Until you find an appropriate person. That is why many organizations outsource this to DPCOs, right? Or you can actually have an individual who is just a person who has a certification that can then sit in as your DPO. So for example, GPM Associates, we do provide an outsourced DPO service as well. So if you don't have someone within your organization, we can sit in as your DPO. But I believe in the power of building internal capacity. So while we sit in as your DPO, we then identify and start to train someone who would then become your own internal DPO, with the hopes of handing that over. Because again, internal capacity is something that is just critical in this space. So thank you for that question, Ayo.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So can you look through the chat? The socials for DPM Associates is right there. Email is there if you need to email them, their Instagram, their LinkedIn, their X, and their Facebook. Right. Thank you very much. This has been a very rich conversation. And to just
Likewise.
wrap it up so that we don't hold people it's work on, what is that one thing? The one thing. I mean, I have a lot of things that I've been thinking from this session,
Yeah.
but just one thing, one that
Mhm.
someone needs to take away from the session.
Mhm.
What
Okay.
should that one thing be in one sentence? How should businesses think differently about data from today? One thing, maybe a punchline or a punch
Yeah.
sentence. Yeah.
Um, okay. Phew. Okay, so I would say map your data. Know what you have, know where it is, and know why you have it. Um, because I think that would guide everything else that you have to determine, right? Map your data, know what you have, know where it is, and know why you have it. Because really your data is either going to be your biggest risk or your strongest advantage. The difference is how you handle the data, right? So again, data will end up being either your biggest risk or it's going to be your strongest advantage. All of that depends on how responsibly, how ethically, how securely you handle the data that you have. So map it, know what it is, know where it is, and know why you have it. And hopefully with that knowledge, and with the support of a DPCL, you should be good to go.
Right. Thank you so much, Deborah. I mean, for me, I'm going to think henceforward, am I a data controller or a data processor? Right. And
Or
also
both.
in exactly, and also in mapping my data, I would then begin to think what frameworks do I need to put in place? What principles am I following? Very
Absolutely.
important. Thank you so much, Deborah. It's been a very
Yes.
rich conversation. It's been an
Pleasure.
amazing one. Everybody go to our socials, and also we're gonna put up our own socials for focus group.
Yes. Yes.
Follow us on focus group on Instagram, on TikTok, on LinkedIn, everywhere.
Yeah.
Just go and follow us. And also you can follow Deborah and myself on LinkedIn. If you click on our what's it called? I think our LinkedIn handle is there. Again, Dr. Oladipo Raji, look, I don't know. When I met him, has been an amazing, and I mean, I don't see him as, I see him as a professor because I've already told him, when are you taking the next, when are you starting the next PhD, when are you starting the next one, you also want to follow him. He has amazing nuggets. This is somebody who had this BSc Business Administration, MSc Business Administration, PhD Business Administration. Come on, you have a whole lot to learn from him. Someone who started focus group 10 years ago. And focus group has been impactful across industries, multinationals, state, federal, just name it, right? And with so many clients, partners, OEMs that has worked with focus group for the past 10 years. And this is why we brought this webinar to you. It's series, one down 7 months ago, and we still have lineup of events. We have an hackathon coming up at the University of Lagos. We also have a seminar, partners and industry seminar coming up, a football match, and of course the anniversary dinner itself. And I want to believe we're going to be seeing Deborah at the anniversary dinner. Yeah. So everybody anticipates the next webinar is 14th of May, and we have somebody amazing coming. You don't want to miss us. Look at how amazing this conversation is. You don't want to miss the next webinar. It's going to help you. It's going to help your organization. It's going to even help you grow as a person, as an entity in your career path. If you feel that you're not an entrepreneur yet, think of yourself as a, there's a word for it when you're working and yet you're an entrepreneur. There's a word for it. Think of yourself as that person, right? Thank you all for joining today. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate your time. About 60 plus people joined from the beginning of this conversation up until now. We don't take your time for granted. We do not at all. Thank you and thank you very much. If you want to learn more about focus group, like I said, please visit our website, visit our social media handles, and you will learn more. Thank you all for joining. I don't know if Mr. Dr. Oladipo Raji has anything to say. And also, we're going to be taking a group picture. Please turn on your camera, Dr. Oladipo, please. Turn on your camera. We're going to take a group picture. Everybody will say cheese.
You have to enable my camera. It's not enabled yet.
Oh, okay. We'll do that now.
So while that is coming on, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who has joined this webinar. It's the first in our series, just like Anu said. We have 7 more to go, 7 powerful more to go. In fact, I'm beginning to think that after the 8th, I need to do one special webinar to talk to people about how to design for growth from the beginning. As a company, we started 10 years ago as an SME. In less than 3 years, we become a big enterprise. And in fact, the tax office moved our file from the small tax office to large tax office in that 3rd year of operation. Every company needs to come and learn about that. I hope they will give me time to speak about that in this series. That will be my own anniversary gift to everyone. So thank you very much for joining. I'm still waiting for my camera to be enabled so I can come up and you can take the picture.
You can turn it on from your end now. It has been enabled.
Oh, okay. It's still telling me your camera is disabled.
Okay.
I hope not my system.
Let's turn on this camera. Is it enabled?
Okay, yeah, it's enabled now.
Yes.
It's enabled now. I hope you can see me now.
Not yet.
Okay. I'm sure it will come. I can
I
see
think
myself.
they can see you now. I can see you, but they can see you now. Technical team said they can see you.
Okay.
So are we good to go for the screenshot? Is it up? All right. Okay, so cheese.
Cheese.
One more time. Cheese.
Cheese.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. God bless you all. We'll be looking forward to the next webinar with you. Or thank you so much, Deborah. It was an amazing time with you. I'm sure we have a whole lot to talk about. Thank you very much. Everyone, thank you. I can see Simon Agi, Bola, Mark Jeko, Dumakinta de Glorious. At some point, you rose up you raised your hand. I don't know if you had a question, but you dropped it. Kola Wale, Akiyani, Rachel, everybody, thank you all so much. And can also see Aduni Raji here. That should be Dr. Oladipo Raji's wife. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, and God bless you. Bye.
Thanks, Anu, for
I
the
know.
moderation. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Bye.
Thank you.